Chapter 9 is about the communication processes we use when we're proposing new ideas at work, the process of creating innovation. It's a great topic because we're in a world where innovation is happening at a really rapid rate, and we're facing problems in our local communities, even in the global community, sticky problems that require new thinking. We're seeing the effects of climate change, for instance, and in local communities, you might be noticing problems like increases in homelessness or cost of living. Um, these are problems that require innovative thinking and the kinds of communication that make innovation seem safe, less risky, so that we can generate lots of new ideas and find the ones that actually have traction in our world. Innovation is sometimes initiated by individuals, people with uh, really clear, innovative visions and the skills to promote those visions. Sometimes they are very notable because they are disruptors. That is, they are people who are willing to really throw away old models and start over. But as this chapter makes clear, just as often and maybe more often, innovation comes from groups of people working together, often diverse groups of people with different kinds of expertise, different kinds of cognitive models, come together to find something new that works. And in those situations, communication is even more important as we try to coordinate the efforts of people who are very creative. Why is innovation risky? Well, if you're trying to propose a new idea and it's rejected, it could leave you feeling bad about your own expertise, questioning your own ability. Um, but sometimes new ideas are risky because when we propose something new, we're questioning the old. And people may be holding on tightly to those old ideas because they seem to have worked in the past, or maybe those people are the ones who created those ways of doing things. So we sometimes run into resistance, and sometimes people will undermine innovation for these reasons. That can undermine our relationships with them. So communication becomes really important in convincing people to hang in there with us as we try out new ideas. If new ideas don't happen in organizations, the work tends to become outdated. The products are no longer responsive to the needs of the audience, to the consumers, the customer. So it's risky not to innovate. But then if innovations fail or they're wildly off the mark, they can be costly, may even lead an organization to lose a lot of money and maybe even go out of business. But at the same time, it's risky for us to keep doing the same thing when we're faced with dramatically new conditions, whether it's at work, in our communities, even in our families. Innovative communication helps us to uh, stay relevant, right? And to solve the problems that we're faced in within our work. So in this chapter, we trace the results of several very interesting studies. One is a study of a work group that had created a new and very successful athletic shoe some time ago, the pump shoe. And as we look at how that happened in this organization, we see that innovative teams use some very specific kinds of communication behavior. For instance, the chapter talks about help seeking. People know how to ask for help. People know how to offer help when they're struggling with a knotty part of a problem. These teams were really good at combining people with diverse kinds of backgrounds and expertise. And in the case of this shoe, with people who understood hydrology and pumps, people who understood the athletic shoe market, people who understand how the body works when it's using an athletic shoe to achieve better jumping or faster running. A second study looks at theater directors. When we think about the theater, um, dramatic production as a place where we see a lot of creativity. In fact, actors are basically paid to be creative people, right? They do this as their work. But the study makes clear that the directors who can work with actors to bring out really creative performances have some tricks that they use. One of them is the use of creative constraints. So rather than say to an actor or to the team that you're working with, or even to yourself, hey, just come up with something new in an open-ended way. Creative directors say, here are some constraints. You have to play this role so that the audience laughs. You have to play this role so that it's believable to people with a certain kind of expectation. But beyond that, have at it and create a role that really works. Working within constraints actually requires us to be more creative in some ways. And good actors seem able to do that. And good directors, as well as those people who direct product development teams, have this idea in mind. There's a look at some old research on what we call innovation champions. These are people who are able to push new ideas through an organization to achieve success, to achieve uh, new products, new services, new ways of doing the work. These innovative champions take a variety of different approaches, and I think one of the takeaways here is that it may depend a bit on your personality, on the place that you work, on the kind of environment that you work in to figure out what is the best way to go forward. We see that some of these champions, these people who are proven winners in the innovation game, take a very rational approach. They provide strong evidence to convince leaders that change is necessary and that their idea can work. Like that problem solution presentation kind of approach that we talked about in the last chapter when we talked about expressing dissent. Other innovators take a very participative approach. They're good at building teams. They do a lot of consulting. They ask other people for their ideas, ask for advice, and then take all of that and weave it into an innovation that has strong acceptance because they've done the relational work to build that acceptance. Some innovators are renegades. They just set out on their own and they prove to people that the innovation is going to work. They are, in some ways, big risk takers because they're willing to put aside the traditional ways of getting approval and go out on their own. Maybe these are people who are in charge of a new startup, right? Or who are proposing new ideas to funders that really do seem different from what's in the industry right now. And then maybe at the farthest extreme, we have people who are disruptors. These people weren't really discussed in the early research on champions, but we see lots of disruptors in the environment now. People like the founder of Tesla, for instance, Elon Musk. These are folks who have really taken traditional ideas and turned them on their head, maybe even thrown them out the door and said, let's start new. Let's try something radically different. And let's disrupt traditional ways of thinking, in this case, maybe in the auto industry. The chapter discusses some other disruptors, and each of these approaches has advantages and disadvantages. Each of them is likely to run into a certain kind of resistance, and the point is not to say that there's one way forward with innovation, but rather that we have to adapt our approach to a variety of factors. We also talk about innovation in the nonprofit world. Many of our thorniest problems are not the ones in business, although those are tough too, right? How do we address poverty? How do we address the disruption of climate change? How do we address things like homelessness and people who have mental health issues? Some of our old ways of thinking about these things are not really working so well anymore. So we look at how innovative nonprofits really drive new thinking, right? And we see that they do some very specific things. For instance, they're very open to what we call sort of like small experiments, prototyping new solutions on a small scale. It reduces the risk. It allows people who are innovative to try something and have that experience and be rewarded for thinking outside the box. But it doesn't require a lot of investment by the organization or its funders. These organizations teach us that innovation has to happen consistent with the mission of the organization. And one of the things that can be problematic is that we're off running around trying this, trying that, allowing our mission to creep beyond sort of the real focus that we have in our work as a nonprofit. And so we can learn a lot, not just from corporate innovators, but from people who are trying this out in the world of social entrepreneurialism. We take up this word of entrepreneur or entrepreneurism in the chapter. We live in a culture that traditionally has really valued entrepreneurs, and we are indebted to these people for creating inventions and solving problems, go all the way back to Edison and the light bulb, or more recent innovators like Steve Jobs at Apple Computer. But at the same time, if we are overly enthusiastic about the idea, we can run into some trouble because it turns out, as I said earlier, innovation is often not an individual process. And sometimes an entrepreneur is much better at hyping innovation than actually creating it and implementing it. So we need to be careful about overhyping innovation. And we've seen some really market examples, like the company Theranos that's mentioned in the chapter, where seemingly innovative products turned out um, to not have any real legs or any substance behind them because people were very maybe too willing to accept the claims of an entrepreneur. So we argue for the idea of principled innovation. Right? That is innovation that is consistent with our values, that is honest about its contributions, that avoids the hype. We explore some other big trends. Artificial intelligence is a wildly innovative industry right now. As I talk to you, we see all kinds of promise. We see all kinds of disruption in industry as these smart computer models start solving problems that people used to solve. And again, we find lots of promise here. And part of what we have to do as communicators is figure out what it is that we do as humans that add uniquely to the process of innovation, and what can we outsource to AI and other technologies. And that's a tricky thing to figure out right now. But we know that AI is actually really good at doing some of the more mundane kinds of thinking that we need and the repetitive kinds of tasks that are involved in just about every job. And so maybe the answer is to allow AI to do as many of those as possible under the observation of people who apply ethical standards and make sure that the technology does no harm as it invents new ways of doing things. And also to allow that technology to support us as we think about problems that maybe are uniquely human and require a kind of creativity that, at least not yet, uh, has been demonstrated by artificial intelligence. We give you some examples of innovation in industries like education. We talk about journalism and how it has dramatically changed and how journalism organizations have really struggled to innovate and yet still provide the core function of journalism, which is to provide a fact-based news. We contrast its failure, although we see lots of new innovation in journalism, don't get me wrong, with the principles that drive companies like Google. And we go back to some of the early principles that were guiding Google's innovative culture and share some of those with you, some of which have been abandoned actually in recent years, but some of which are still allowing that organization to be innovative. As we apply the RNF model, think about attending, look at your organization, look for signs that it's maybe falling behind, right? That it's stuck in its ways. You can do that by looking around outside your organization for cues that other organizations are pulling ahead, right? Try, as we saw in the sports shoe teams, right, to consult with people who have different kinds of expertise and Ask them how they might solve a problem that you've worked on from your own perspective, right? So it's all about noticing when innovation is needed, looking for the things that might lead to resistance and the people who might resist change, and then devising your approach based on your understanding of those things. Sense making, as usual, means checking with others, right? Look around, talking to peers, trying your ideas out on a small scale, maybe even pilot testing them if you can get buy-in from your supporters. That can be a way of making sense, checking your ideas to see if they really hold up. Transformation means taking action, right? You can try one of those innovation champion techniques. You can think about those behaviors, communication behaviors that are so important to creative directors, to creative teams, to nonprofits. And then maintenance means creating processes in your organization, in your life that encourage you to be innovative, to question assumptions, to question sort of the status quo, the normal way of doing things, to see if it's still working, right? And um, that might be a way to always be thinking about innovation.